The homecoming. They say every soldier needs a place to call home. For Frank Morrison, a 38-year-old Marine Corps veteran, that sanctuary became a modest ranch-style house nestled in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, where he lived with his wife Elena. Behind the facade of their picture-perfect marriage lurked a shadow that neither neighbors nor friends could have imagined. Elena Morrison, born Rodriguez, proprietor of the thriving chain of upscale bridal boutiques, Eternal Elegance, carried secrets darker than the Pacific Northwest nights. Her past bore another name, another life, one intertwined with the most ruthless figures in Nevada's underworld. 7 years ago, she'd vanished with $14 million belonging to her former employer and lover. Now, that past had found its way to their peaceful haven. Dawn crept across Portland's skyline, painting the city in subtle watercolors. The Morrison household on Pine Grove Avenue stirred to life as Elena busied herself in the spacious kitchen while Frank prepared for another cross-country haul. She'd chosen this quiet neighborhood deliberately, a place where successful middle-class families blended seamlessly into the landscape of American normalcy. "Frank," she called, arranging steaming plates of eggs Benedict on the breakfast table. "Better hurry, honey, or it'll get cold." Heavy footsteps descended the stairs. Frank appeared in the doorway tall, broad-shouldered, wearing his weathered brown leather jacket. The scar along his left cheek, a souvenir from an IED explosion in Helmand Province, had faded to a thin silver line. But Elena knew the invisible wounds ran deeper. Every night, he still dreamed of the 3 brothers he'd lost in that firefight. "Eggs Benedict," he smiled, kissing her forehead. "You're spoiling me again. What did I do to deserve such royal treatment?" Elena laughed, though anxiety flickered behind her dark eyes. Each time he mentioned not deserving her, guilt twisted in her stomach. If only he knew the truth. Their meeting 6 years ago read like a scene from a Hollywood romance. Elena, then introducing herself as Maria Gonzalez, had stopped at Red's roadside diner during her escape from Vegas. She'd planned the operation for months: new identity papers, backstory, offshore accounts. $14 million and a flash drive containing enough evidence to topple Mitchell Harding's entire empire. She understood this was a one-way ticket, either freedom or death. That evening she'd sat in a corner booth, nervously stirring cold coffee, when the rumble of a diesel engine broke through her thoughts. A massive 18-wheeler pulled into the lot, and moments later, a tall man in a faded denim jacket pushed through the diner's door. She immediately noticed the military bearing, the fresh scar across his cheek. "Excuse me, ma'am," his deep voice startled her, "but I believe you dropped this." He held out a silk scarf, Harding's gift, which she'd completely forgotten about. Their eyes met, and something shifted in her chest. His green eyes held the same weariness, the same loneliness she faced in the mirror each morning. "Frank Morrison," he introduced himself, long-haul trucker and part-time rescuer of beautiful strangers' silk scarves. Maria Gonzalez," she marveled at how easily the lie rolled off her tongue. "Care to join me? The coffee's terrible, but I hear the apple pie's decent." They talked until sunrise. Frank shared stories of his Marine service, how civilian life had felt like wearing a suit 2 sizes too small after discharge, how he'd found peace in the endless highways. She listened, feeling safer than she had in years. "Penny for your thoughts," her husband's voice drew her back to the present. "Just remembering our first meeting," Elena smiled, adjusting his collar. "Remember that awful apple pie?" "Worst pie of my life, but the best evening," he kissed her forehead. "All right, I should hit the road. Last run before the weekend." After Frank left, Elena drove to the main offices of Eternal Elegance. Over 6 years, she transformed the bridal boutique chain into a flourishing enterprise worth millions. The business model wasn't accidental. High cash flow operations provided perfect cover for laundering the stolen funds. Her office occupied the top floor of a gleaming business complex. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed views of the Willamette River and downtown Portland skyline. Alina reviewed documents for her upcoming meeting with bank executives when her assistant, Jennifer, entered. Mrs. Morrison, the bank representatives confirmed for 2 o'clock. She placed a folder on the desk. They're prepared to discuss the credit line for expansion. Alina nodded. Every document was meticulously prepared, a skill she'd learned from Harding. Mitchell, snake eyes Harding. She tried not to think about him, but sometimes woke in cold sweats, remembering his steel-gray eyes and the voice that could freeze blood in your veins. The banking meeting proceeded smoothly. Alina masterfully juggled financial projections, outlining expansion strategies. None of the suited executives could have imagined this polished businesswoman had once worked the Vegas streets until Harding recognized her potential and made her his protege. That evening, Frank returned early. They sat on the back deck, watching the sunset while discussing future plans. Alina sipped her Cabernet while Frank nursed his favorite craft beer. Been doing some calculations. Frank set down a worn notebook filled with figures. If everything goes according to plan, I could qualify for a loan on my own rig in a couple months, tired of driving for someone else. Sweetheart, why take out a loan? Alina set down her wine glass. We have savings, I could. No, he interrupted gently but firmly. You already do too much for us. This needs to be mine, you understand. She understood perfectly. Frank had always been this way, honest to his core. She loved him for it, and hated herself for the deception. Suddenly, the evening quiet shattered with the sound of an approaching vehicle. A black Lincoln Navigator with tinted windows cruised past their house and stopped. Alina's blood turned to ice. She knew that car. Harding always preferred them, black as his soul. Frank, her voice wavered, but she never finished. The front door exploded off its hinges. Chapter 2: Masks Fall Away. Time has a peculiar way of stretching during life's critical moments. For Alina, the next few minutes unfolded like a slow-motion nightmare. She watched 2 men in black suits storm into their living room. Behind them, tapping a silver-headed cane against the hardwood floor, Mitchell's snake eyes Harding entered, lean, silver-haired, impeccable in a charcoal Armani suit. His steel-gray eyes found Alina instantly. Frank reacted with marine reflexes, but against 3 professionals, one armed, he stood no chance. The brief struggle ended with him crashing through the glass coffee table. Don't, please, Alina cried as Raymond Butcher Caldwell, Harding's enforcer, pinned Frank's arms behind his back. How touching, Harding settled into an armchair, crossing his legs. The devoted wife protecting her beloved husband. Tell me, Alina, or should I call you Maria, perhaps Carmen, as you were known when I found you on the Vegas streets? Frank froze, his confused gaze shifting between his wife and the intruder. Oh, Harding raised his hands theatrically. You haven't told your husband about our shared history, about how I discovered you, an 18-year-old prostitute with an unfinished law degree and grand ambitions. How I gave you education, made you my right hand. Shut up, Alina shouted, but Harding merely smirked. Tell him, darling, how you managed my legitimate businesses, how you laundered money through casino operations, how you warmed my bed. He paused, savoring the impact. And how one night you stole $14 million and a flash drive containing very sensitive information. Frank stopped struggling. His face became an unreadable mask, though muscles worked beneath his jaw. Alina watched the light in his eyes, that boundless trust she'd cherished, slowly extinguish. Raymond, Harding nodded to his enforcer, explained to Mr. Morrison how we handle betrayal. The first blow caught Frank in the solar plexus. The second, to his jaw, split his lip. Blood stained his white shirt crimson. Alina lunged forward, but the third man restrained her. 25 million, Harding rose from the chair. With interest over 6 years. You have 1 month, Alina, otherwise. He gestured to Frank, whom Raymond was methodically beating into a bloody mess, I'll start sending him back in pieces." The intruders departed as suddenly as they'd arrived. Elena rushed to her husband, trying to stem the bleeding with paper towels. Harding's mocking voice echoed in her mind. 25 million. 25 million. Why? Frank's voice came out hoarse with pain. They sat in the hospital emergency room awaiting x-rays. Why didn't you tell me? Elena sat silently, twisting a blood-stained handkerchief. How could she explain that his entire life for the past 6 years had been built on lies? "I need to tell you everything," she finally whispered, "from the beginning." Las Vegas, 8 years ago. 18-year-old Elena Rodriguez stood on the corner of Fremont Street, shivering in a short dress. She dropped out of law school 3 months earlier, no money for tuition, dreams of becoming an attorney shattered against harsh reality. That's when she first encountered Harding. His Lincoln pulled alongside and he offered not sex but dinner. Over that meal he questioned her about life, studies, aspirations, then made his proposition, become his protege. "You have a sharp mind and a beautiful face," he'd said. "I'll teach you to use both." The next 2 years were a whirlwind. Harding paid for business school, hired tutors in etiquette and finance. She proved an apt pupil, quickly mastering the intricacies of money laundering through legitimate enterprises, learning to negotiate with bankers and politicians. Then she became his mistress. Not through coercion. Harding never used force. Simply, at some point, she thought herself in love with this dangerous, powerful man. "I was a fool," Elena wiped her tears. "Thought he loved me. Then I discovered the truth." "What truth?" Frank winced as the nurse cleaned his split lip. "About his real business. Not just money laundering, human trafficking, drugs, contract killings. I accidentally found files on his computer. Everything was there, names, dates, amounts. I copied it all to a flash drive." "And stole the money," Frank finished. 14 million in cash. I planned the escape for 3 months, new documents, cover story, escape route, and then I met you." Heavy silence filled the hospital corridor. Elena watched her husband struggle internally, the desire to push away the woman who'd lied to him, warring with the need to protect her. "So our marriage, was that a lie too?" he finally asked. "No," she grabbed his hand, ignoring the dried blood. "I swear it's the only real thing in my life. I fell for you that first moment in that diner. You were so honest, real." Frank closed his eyes. His chest rose and fell heavily. "We have a month," he finally said. "Where's the money?" "Most is invested in the business. About 6 million in offshore accounts, but 25, she shook her head. "I'd need time to liquidate everything." "No," Frank opened his eyes and Elena shuddered. They held that same look she remembered from his war stories. "We don't have time, but I have a plan." Chapter 3: The Warrior's Gambit. The abandoned industrial warehouse on Seattle's outskirts greeted Frank Morrison with tomb-like cold. Sunlight pierced through broken skylights, creating an intricate pattern of shadows on the concrete floor. Pressing a hand against his bruised ribs, he slowly circled the space, mentally mapping out a tactical operation. "Everything has to be perfect," he muttered, pulling out a battered notebook. "No randomness, no mistakes." The days following Harding's invasion had transformed their comfortable home into a military command post. Frank seemed to revert 10 years, back to his former life. A life where every decision could be the last. "You've lost your mind." Mike Ramirez, his old Marine reconnaissance buddy, stared at the blueprints spread across the kitchen table. "This isn't Afghanistan, brother. This is civilian territory." "They stopped being civilians when they broke into my home," Frank pointed to the warehouse schematic. "Look, first defensive line, trip wires with signal flares. Not combat grade, just noise and light. Here and here we'll set decoy traps." Bruises still marked his face, but his eyes burned with the cold fury of a professional soldier. Elena, watching from the doorway, barely recognized the gentle, peaceful man she'd married. How long for preparation? Mike took notes. 1 week, 10 days maximum. Frank unrolled another blueprint. I need materials. Wire, fireworks, signal flares, construction tools. Nothing illegal, all available at regular stores. Meanwhile, Elena launched her own operation. She methodically called potential buyers, met with brokers, appraisers, and lawyers. Her Eternal Elegance boutique chain had to be sold off piecemeal. 4 million for 3 boutiques. She laid the documents before Frank on the third evening. Best offer we'll get. Sell, he nodded without looking up from studying some diagram. But don't tell Harding the real amount. Let him think we've gathered the full 25. Elena sank into a chair, massaging her temples. Frank, maybe. Maybe we should just give them what we have. I could sell everything, borrow from contacts. No, he finally looked up from the papers. If we start negotiating, they'll see us as weak, and they destroy the weak. I've seen it in combat. The warehouse transformed day by day. Frank and Mike worked obsessively, converting the abandoned space into a genuine training ground. Every entrance, every window, every dark corner became part of an elaborate defense system. Trip wire with smoke bomb goes here. Frank stretched thin wire between columns. When it triggers, smoke fills the entire space. In darkness and panic, they won't notice the main traps. Mike secured camouflage netting over one of the improvised pits. You sure this won't kill anyone? He nodded towards sharpened stakes at the bottom. Not if they're careful. Frank checked the wire tension. Main goal, make them lose balance, distract attention. Like reconnaissance taught us, create chaos and exploit it. By week's end, preparations reached the final stage. Elena had sold 7 boutiques, netting almost 9 million. Frank had perfected the trap system, transforming the warehouse into a labyrinth of fear. Now we need to make them come here, he said, looking at his wife. Call him, say the money's ready. With trembling fingers, Elena dialed the number she'd once known by heart. Harding answered immediately. I hope you have good news, darling. His voice was calm and polite as always. The money's collected, she tried to sound confident. All 25 million, but the meeting's on my terms only. And those terms are: Old Military Warehouse on Industrial Avenue, tomorrow at midnight. Pause. Interesting choice of venue. His voice carried barely perceptible mockery. Very well, darling, tomorrow at midnight. When the connection ended, Elena looked at her husband. He nodded curtly. Phase 1 was complete. The night before the operation, Frank couldn't sleep. He sat in the garage, checking and rechecking equipment. Signal flares, smoke bombs, ropes, flashlights, everything arranged with military precision. Elena found him there well past midnight. Forgive me, she whispered, embracing him from behind. This is all my fault. No, he squeezed her hand. The fault lies with whoever came to our home with threats, and tomorrow he'll regret it. In the garage darkness, his eyes gleamed like steel, the eyes of a Marine ready for battle. Tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. Chapter 4, Semper Fidelis. The night arrived moonless. Dense clouds blanketed Seattle's sky, transforming the industrial district into a sea of shadows. Frank Morrison took position on the warehouse's metal catwalk an hour before the appointed time. His fingers absently stroked the signal pistol's grip, the only weapon he'd chosen to employ. Mike's quiet voice crackled through his earpiece. 3 vehicles approaching from the east, Black Navigator and 2 Suburbans. Looks like your princess told the truth about the meeting time. Frank glanced down where Elena stood in the dim glow of a single lamp. She wore a sharp black suit, the same one she'd worn closing her first deals for Harding. In her hands, a leather briefcase. Empty, naturally, but only the 3 of them knew that. Remember the plan, Frank whispered into the mic. No improvisation. Soon as it starts, get her out through the west exit. The sound of approaching engines shattered the silence at exactly midnight. Headlights caught Alina's silhouette standing in the center of the empty space. She remained motionless, only gripping the briefcase tighter. Harding appeared first, tall figure in a gray suit. 6 enforcers followed, including the massive Raymond Butcher Caldwell. Their heavy footsteps echoed through the warehouse. "Alina, darling," Harding's voice was almost tender. "How careless of you to choose such an isolated location." "The money's here," she lifted the briefcase. 25 million cash as you demanded." Of course, Harding signaled his men. "Raymond, be so kind as to verify." Caldwell stepped forward, and at that moment the first trap triggered. Invisible wire across his path gave way. The deafening bang of a signal flare made everyone flinch. White smoke instantly filled the space. "What the hell?" Caldwell's shout drowned in a series of new explosions. Frank's plan worked perfectly. In panic and confusion, Harding's gunmen fired blindly, only adding to the chaos. Through the smoke, signal flares burst here and there, transforming the warehouse into a surreal light show. Mike, following instructions precisely, already dragged Alina toward the emergency exit. Frank saw her resisting, unwilling to leave him alone, but there was no time for arguments. Then true hell broke loose. One by one, Harding's men fell into the prepared traps. Someone plunged through a camouflaged pit, another tangled in netting and tumbled downstairs. Cries of pain and curses mixed with gunfire. Frank methodically launched signal flares, creating the illusion of multiple attackers. His military experience transformed simple pyrotechnics into effective weapons of demoralization. "Behind us," someone yelled, and the next moment Frank sensed movement at his back. He spun just in time to block Caldwell's strike. The giant had somehow reached the catwalk and now loomed over him like an enraged grizzly. A vicious fight ensued. Frank remembered this man, the one who'd beaten him in his own home. Time for payback. A series of precise strikes to the solar plexus, a leg sweep, and Caldwell crashed down onto a pile of scrap metal. Smoke gradually dissipated. Across the warehouse floor, Harding's men lay groaning in various positions. Some crawled toward exits, others simply sat against walls, holding injured limbs. "Impressive," Harding's voice emerged from the darkness. "Simply impressive." Frank whirled around. Harding stood at the far end of the catwalk holding a pistol. His gray suit remained immaculate, as if the previous chaos hadn't touched him. "You know, I expected something like this," he continued, stepping forward. "But I didn't think you'd be quite so creative." "Drop the gun." Frank already calculated attack angles. "Why?" Harding smiled. "So we can fight like men very well." To Frank's surprise, he actually tossed the weapon aside. Then attacked, lightning fast, professional, without a single wasted motion. A terrible duel began. Harding fought unlike a common criminal. His technique was honed by years of training. Every strike aimed for maximum damage. Frank barely managed to block the most dangerous attacks. They circled the catwalk, exchanging blows. Blood pounded in temples, breathing became ragged. At one point, Harding executed a series of lightning combinations, and Frank found himself pressed against the railing. "Not bad for a truck driver," Harding exhaled, preparing the finishing strike. "For a Marine," Frank corrected and launched his counterattack. The technique he used wasn't taught in regular martial arts schools. This was special training, known only to Marine reconnaissance. Grab, sweep, throw. Harding flew toward the opposite wall but twisted cat-like at the last moment. Where did you learn that move?" His voice carried a note of surprise. "3rd Reconnaissance Battalion, Marine Corps," Frank assumed combat stance. "Afghanistan, 2015. Harding froze. For the first time all evening, his face lost its composure. "3rd Battalion, under Colonel Hutchinson." "How do you—" But Frank couldn't finish. Harding attacked again, now using the same techniques. They grappled in a final struggle, two professional fighters, two Marines. Strike, block, grab. Final surge, and Harding hit the floor, pinned by Frank's knee to the metal grating. Surrender, Frank gasped, twisting his arm. Charlie 1-1, Harding suddenly spoke through clenched teeth. Frank jerked as if struck. That was his platoon's call sign in Afghanistan. Who the hell are you? Mitchell Harding, 1st Reconnaissance Battalion, Marine Corps. He stopped resisting. The Gulf 91, same platoon, different war. Frank slowly loosened his grip. Harding sat up, rubbing his shoulder. You know, I knew right away you were military, he smirked. Those traps, we set similar ones in Kuwait. Strange silence fell. Two former Marines regarded each other, one covered in bruises and cuts, the other with a split lip but still in his perfect suit. How much really? Frank finally asked. What? How much does she owe? The real amount without interest in posturing. Harding paused, surveying his defeated men below. 14 million, he finally said, plus the flash drive with data. Frank nodded and stood. You have a Marine's word, the debt will be paid, in full. Harding studied him carefully, then also rose. A Marine's word, you say? He rubbed his chin. You know, I've never met a Marine who'd break it. Chapter 5, Fresh Horizons. History savors irony. The sail of the empire Alina had built over 6 years took just 3 weeks. She sat in her office, already being cleared of furniture, methodically signing documents transferring ownership of Eternal Elegance boutiques. Each signature brought them closer to freedom, yet resonated with a dull ache somewhere in her chest. After all, she'd invested not just stolen money in this business, but a piece of her soul. Final contract, Mrs. Morrison. The elderly lawyer in round spectacles handed her another folder. After this, the boutique chain officially transfers to new owners. Alina paused for a moment, gazing at the perfectly aligned contract lines. $13.5 million, almost the entire sum she'd once stolen from Harding. The remaining $500,000 she and Frank had gathered by selling their house, cars, and all valuables. Forgive me for asking, the lawyer coughed delicately, but are you certain about this decision? The business is thriving, metrics are growing. More than certain, Alina signed the last page. Sometimes you need to release the past to move forward. The old warehouse greeted them with coolness and the smell of metal. Alina involuntarily shuddered, remembering events from 2 weeks ago, signal flare smoke, Harding's men shouting, sounds of combat. Now it was quiet, only wind whistling through the rafters and water dripping somewhere. Frank stood beside her, firmly gripping the leather briefcase containing the money. His face had mostly healed, only a fatting bruise remained under one eye. Alina noticed his fingers trembling slightly on the briefcase handle, the first time she'd seen her husband this tense since that day. Harding appeared soundlessly, as if materializing from shadows. Alone, without guards as they'd agreed. In his perfectly fitted gray Armani suit, he seemed an alien element here. I was beginning to miss this charming place, he smiled, surveying the space. I hope we can dispense with special effects this time. 14 million in cash, Frank stepped forward, extending the briefcase. And the flash drive with data, everything as agreed. You can verify. Harding accepted the briefcase with a slight nod, unhurriedly opened it, removed several stacks, thumbed through bills. You know, Morrison, he spoke without looking up from the money, in my business, you rarely meet people who truly keep their word. Usually they try to bargain, threaten, or simply disappear. But to honestly return every cent like this. It's a Marine's word, Frank replied. Yes, a Marine's word. Harding closed the briefcase and looked intently at Alina. You chose a worthy husband, darling. Pity our acquaintance began, rather unfortunately. Alina only pressed closer to Frank. Harding took several steps toward the exit but suddenly stopped. By the way, Morrison, I heard you wanted to buy your own truck, start your own business. Frank tensed. That was the plan. Why? Harding turned and unexpectedly handed him a stack of money from the briefcase. There's roughly $2 million here. This is your money now, Marine, not your wife's. Her debt is settled. I'm confident you'll use it wisely. Buy yourself a rig, start an honest business. Why are you doing this? Frank didn't rush to take the money. Because men like you should work for themselves, not others, Harding shrugged. Consider it an investment in an honest man and brother-in-arms. Frank slowly accepted the stacks, as if they might explode any moment. Thank you. Don't mention it. Harding headed for the exit. And if you ever need help, call. I always have work for a Marine who keeps his word. His footsteps faded into the warehouse darkness, leaving behind ringing silence and the faint scent of expensive cologne. The following months flew by like a single day. Frank threw himself into creating his own transportation company. Started with one truck, a brand new Peterbilt 579, which he selected with the care of someone purchasing a spacecraft. Morrison Logistics. Elena traced her finger over the fresh lettering on the truck door. Sounds substantial. This is just the beginning, Frank smiled, embracing his wife. In a year, we'll have a whole fleet. He proved correct. By year's end, the company operated 5 trucks and maintained a steady stream of contracts. Harding kept his word. Several major accounts came through his connections. They chose the coastal town of Astoria, Oregon, randomly, simply pointed at the map. The small white house on the bluff needed repairs, but the ocean view from the terrace compensated for all shortcomings. Elena relished her new life as a homemaker. No more business meetings, contracts, and endless accounting. Just the house, garden, and anticipation of their firstborn. I want a boy, she said, arranging flower pots on the windowsill. Just as stubborn and honest as his father. Frank only chuckled, but she noticed how tenderly he stroked her growing belly when he thought she was asleep. The Morrison Logistics office occupied a modest building downtown. Frank spent most of his time there when not on runs. Elena sometimes stopped by with homemade lunch and sat for hours on the corner sofa, watching her husband work with documents or talk with drivers. You know, she said once, I've never seen you so complete, like you've finally found your place. Maybe, he gazed thoughtfully out the window where his trucks lined the parking lot. Just now I know for certain all this is honest, earned through my own work, not. He trailed off. Elena rose and embraced him from behind. The past is past, now we have a new life. On Christmas Eve, when the first snow draped Astoria's roofs in silver, the mailman delivered a card. Plain white envelope without return address. Inside, a photograph of Las Vegas at night and a brief inscription. Semper Fi. P.S. Heard you're expecting an addition to the family. If it's a boy, teach him to keep his word. If a girl, teach her to choose men like her father. P.P.S. By the way, Morrison, your guys are doing excellent work with deliveries. No signature needed. What do you think? Elena handed the card to her husband. Frank studied the message carefully, then smiled. Elena laughed and leaned against his shoulder. Outside, snow fell silently, logs crackled in the fireplace, and somewhere deep in the house, Christmas music played softly. Their new life was just beginning, and for the first time in years, it was a genuinely honest beginning. Somewhere in Las Vegas, in an office atop a skyscraper, Mitchell Harding placed a simple framed photograph on his shelf, a shot of 2 young Marines in full gear against Afghan mountains. On the back, in faded ink, Semper Fidelis, always faithful. He smiled at his thoughts and returned to studying the shipping report. The first page read, Morrison Logistics Quarterly Delivery Statistics. The numbers spoke for themselves. Frank's business was flourishing. An honest man in his proper place, Harding thought. Maybe not all is lost in this world.